Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 202. On today's episode, we're going to explore a little bit more of Jeffrey Epstein's relationship with J.P. Morgan and the guy who was in charge of things then, Jes Staley. Now, even after Jeffrey Epstein's conviction, even after compliance told J.P. Morgan to break off ties with Jeffrey Epstein, they kept the relationship going. They kept it alive, and they kept him as one of their clients. And you think it's a coincidence that as soon as Jes Staley was gone, that Epstein was no longer a client of J.P. Morgan? Do you think that just happens in a vacuum, folks? That just happens as a coincidence? No, it is not a coincidence. The only reason that Jeffrey Epstein was getting the sort of treatment that he was getting from J.P. Morgan is because he had a few high-placed executives on the inside throughout his tenure as a client of theirs. And one of the most powerful people, obviously, is Jes Staley. We've talked about Jes Staley a lot here on the podcast, and I think it's crucial that we continue to bring his name up because he is one of the top-tier enablers in this whole entire sordid affair. And the fact that he tries to distance himself from his relationship with Epstein when it's very clear just from financials alone that these two were intertwined, it's a tough pill to swallow for me to think that Jes Staley truly believes he's going to be able to avoid scrutiny by his canned ass weak, I hardly knew Jeffrey Epstein. He wasn't my friend, by those sort of responses. That's not going to work. The evidence is very clear that Jes Staley and Jeffrey Epstein not only had a professional relationship, but they also had a personal relationship, and they were very, very close. So, on to this article. The article is from theinstitutionalinvestor.com. The headline is, Did J.P. Morgan Go Easy on Alleged Sex Trafficker, Pedophile, Jeffrey Epstein? The author is Michelle Solarier. And remember, the article was first published in August 2019, August 10th, 2019. Everyone on Wall Street who knew disgraced financier, pedophile, Jeffrey Epstein is busy distancing themselves from the convicted pedophile who died of an apparent suicide Saturday in a federal jail cell in New York City, where he was awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. The lurid case involving underage girls has name-checked politicians, a prince, and a number of billionaires, most of whom likely wish they'd never met the man. No, I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. Maybe they wish he never got caught. But as far as never meeting the man, nah. These people, they welcomed him back to so-called polite society after his first arrest. You know what? It's not that they wish they never met him. They wish he never got caught. They wish their name was never caught up in this. They wish their name was not getting dragged through the mud. But guess what? You are the company that you keep. Then there's J.P. Morgan Chase, which is pushing back against a New York Times report on Thursday that the bank refused to break ties with Epstein a decade ago, even though its compliance staff recommended doing so. The bank finally quit doing business with Epstein, who was a private banking client of J.P. Morgan, in 2013. Now, folks, remember when his conviction was. And now, there's no smokescreen for them. There's nothing that they can hide behind and say, well, we didn't know. We had no idea who Epstein was. We had no idea who we were doing business with, etc., etc. And I'm of the mind, obviously, I don't have the evidence to back this up, but I am of the mind that the reason that Epstein was kept as a client is because people like Jes Staley were benefiting greatly from him being a client. What do you think? All of these transactions went through the proper channel, folks? Do you think that these transactions, there weren't a couple of 0.5% on the backside for people like Jes Staley? I'm not buying any of that. We know how Epstein is. We know how he conducted himself. And we know that money talks, especially in the world that these people inhabited. J.P. Morgan is connected to Epstein through two former high-level executives and, according to the Times, one current one. In 2008, Epstein was charged with sexual offenses with minors and pled guilty to soliciting prostitution in a Florida court. All right, again, a minor cannot be a prostitute. Okay, let's make it clear that a minor cannot be a prostitute. That law was absolutely ridiculous, and obviously that law was created by fellow travelers, right? These disgusting ass politicians that we continually vote into office get in there and they write these laws that have all of these loopholes and this weak ass language so that they have an out when they get caught with their disgusting sick proclivities, or when one of their bundlers gets caught doing something disgusting like Ed Buck or one of these other gross ass sons of bitches. I'll tell you what, the whole entire so-called polite society is the most repugnant group of people, perhaps in the history of the world, in my opinion. In 2008, Epstein was charged with sexual offenses with minors and pled guilty to soliciting prostitution in a Florida court. The next year, J.P. Morgan's compliance officers recommended that the bank cut its ties to the financier, pedophile, because his accounts posed unacceptable legal and reputational risks, the Times reported. Again, like I always say, read in between the lines, folks. What does that mean? Unacceptable legal and reputational risks. So when you hear something like that, it can only mean that this man was doing something that was so beyond the pale that the compliance officers saw maybe some sort of funky transactions, et cetera, whatever it may be, and it was so concerning to them that they went to their bosses and said that this shit is bad and we need to break ties with him because not only is our reputation at risk, but there's unacceptable legal risks involved in handling this man's money as well. And they were shot down. And do you think that just happened because, Jeffrey Epstein's rich and they just wanted his, business? No, it was because of the personal and professional relationship that Jeffrey Epstein built with all of his friends, with all of these people like Jess Staley. A multi-year review the bank conducted at the behest of the comptroller of the currency in the post-Madoff era had flagged Epstein's accounts as potentially problematic, the Times wrote. Yeah, no shit. Potentially problematic. There is so much money laundering going on, so much fraud, so many payoffs, so much dark movement of currency when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein and his associates that it'll make your head spin. I have no idea. Honestly, folks, I'm being dead honest right now. I have no idea how the federal government is still dragging their feet. This is a slam dunk case for them. They can wrap this up with a nice little bow and deliver it to whoever their boss is and have themselves a nice, big, fat piece of publicity as the maverick who took down the remaining remnants of Jeffrey Epstein's organization. And you mean to tell me that there are no prosecutors that would love to have that feather in their cap? Of course there are. But guess what? It's the people above them that are killing this. At this point, I have zero doubt that there has been people getting in the way from the top, throwing mud into the situation, making things harder to prosecute, because this is a slam dunk case. The blueprint has already been laid with Nexium for making this a racketeering case, and all of the evidence that we're just getting from these articles. This is the sort of stuff, this is a dream come true for a young maverick prosecutor. The question is, do we have any of those left in this country? Are there any prosecutors left with the courage to stand up against people like this and do what is right? The stunning revelation in the story was that Mary Erdoes, who is the head of J.P. Morgan's asset management division and widely considered a potential successor to CEO Jamie Dimon, stepped in to keep Epstein as a client, according to 6 people the Times spoke with. Folks, this is the heir apparent who is supposedly going to step into the void when Dimon's gone. This lady believes it's a good idea to step in and tell people, no, we're keeping Epstein as a client. I don't want to hear anything from you. That's it. I'm making the call. Now, why would somebody do that? What motivation could you possibly have to try and keep a relationship with somebody like Jeffrey Epstein? He's not that rich, folks, okay? We're not talking about Warren Buffett here. We're not talking about Sheldon Adelson, right? We're talking about a guy that was worth about $600 million on paper. Don't get me wrong, a lot more money than I'm ever going to see in my life, no doubt about that. But when we're talking about in this rarefied air where he was existing, there are a lot of people much richer than Jeffrey Epstein. But you see, this is deeper than that. This goes deeper than money. And what do I always tell you? Information is worth so much more than money. And that is what Jeffrey Epstein dealt in. And that is why he had all of these deep-seated relationships with people like Mary Erduz and people like Jess Staley. Joseph Evangelisti, a JP Morgan spokesman, said the Times has it wrong. Oh, of course they do. Of course the Times has it wrong. Look, don't get it twisted. I am not a big fan of the New York Times work when it comes to their political hit jobs and the way they go about trying to create divisiveness. Not a fan at all. But there are good reporters that work for the Times. There's no doubt about it. And they do have some good investigative journalists. And I'll tell you this much right now. There is zero chance that anyone can convince me that JP Morgan didn't have a nice, snug, comfy, cozy relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, because they did. They facilitated his transactions and they facilitated his money movement. Now, I don't have evidence to prove that there was money laundering going on JP Morgan's end, but it's very suspicious, folks, okay? We've seen how these banks operate. It's not like these banks are some kind of pinnacle of morality. These banks are corrupt. These people who run these banks, they're corrupt. The whole entire fiduciary banking system is broken and corrupt. So to think these people wouldn't be involved with Jeffrey Epstein, helping him facilitate things, and to hear these canned statements from people like Joseph Evangelisti, the JP Morgan spokesman, it's almost sounds like the teacher in Snoopy at this point. Wow, 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 wow. Or Charlie Brown, excuse me. Wow, 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 wow. That's basically what I hear when I hear them with their excuses at this point. It's such a joke. Mary would never overrule our compliance team or other controls functions to retain a customer, he told the Times. She has only one recollection of formally meeting with the customer, which was the day she fired him as a client. Oh, give me a break. Such a joke. And to hear them act like they wouldn't get involved with compliance, I know that's not true. I've dealt with it personally. I've seen how the upper bosses get involved with compliance agents and muddy the waters and try and get their employees to, obfuscate and make things difficult for compliance people. So don't tell me that she would never do anything like this, please. Give me a break. Epstein had to be kept on as a client, according to the Times report, because he helped recruit wealthy people to JP Morgan's private banking division. Information, folks, okay? Information. This is what it was all about. This SOB was compiling all sorts of information on people, all sorts of dossiers, and he leveraged that information into him creating himself a niche to get himself a little bit more wealth and to be welcomed amongst this rarefied air. The report said that an internal debate at the bank over the issue was so heated that one compliance officer quit. The matter finally came to a head in 2013, according to the Times, when the comptroller of the currency publicly ordered the bank to improve its processes for detecting money laundering and rigorously scrutinizing customers. Folks, it is all right there for you. You just have to read in between the lines. This is a prototypical RICO money laundering case. This is a racketeering organized crime operation if I have ever seen one. And these prosecutors, that Berman has the audacity to get up there with his silly ass little board and ask if anyone knows who Jeffrey Epstein is. Come on, bro. Everybody in your office knows who Jeffrey Epstein is. Even people that don't know how to put their shoes on the right way in the morning, like Maureen Comey, know who he is. All right? So don't act like the Jeffrey Epstein just popped up on your radar. You've been hearing about Jeffrey Epstein since the mid-90s, since Maria Farmer told you about him, and since you've done nothing to stop him, you hold some of the responsibility, sir. Epstein was kicked out of JP Morgan that year. Around the same time, two of his most important connections to JP Morgan also left. It's just a coincidence, folks, okay? You're a conspiracy theorist if you don't believe all of our coincidences and you don't eat our narrative down. Well, you're a conspiracy theorist. Meanwhile, everybody in the real world who's following the case is like, okay, conspiracy, sure. This is long gone away from a conspiracy theory. This has been a cover-up for the last, I don't know how many months at this point. So there's no coincidences here, right? Epstein left because his contacts bolted. Jess Staley, who by then was the CEO of JP Morgan's investment bank, and Glenn Dubin, then head of hedge fund Highbridge Capital, which JP Morgan owns. Oh, this is just a coincidence. There's no way that all of these people are connected. Dubin, Jess Staley, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell. No connections whatsoever. It was just, they had bumped into each other at a few parties one time. Such a joke. And the way they brazenly just lie to everybody about it and expect us to just accept what they say and move on with our lives and not have any hard questions for them. And the reason they do that is because they've operated like that for so long, because nobody ever stepped up and challenged them, nobody ever questioned them, and nobody ever dared to go against the narrative that the snakes in the legacy media would spin for them. Well, those days are over. Those days are long over. You have content creators like Whitney Webb, who are investigative journalists and content creators, people like Whitney Webb, Sean Atwood, Jason Burmis. You have Lisa and Jen over at the Prince and the Pervert podcast. You have people that are holding these people accountable. And the real power, the people who are really moving the needle, are all of you out there listening who are active, who are writing emails, who are keeping this story in the mainstream light for people to understand truly what went on, because they would love nothing more than to bury this story underneath about 5,000 tons of coronavirus news. But we're not going to let them get away with it. Between 2001 and 2009, Staley, Epstein's most powerful connection at JP Morgan, had been running JP Morgan's asset management division, the job Erdoes landed when Staley was promoted to run the investment bank. Staley is now the CEO of Barclays Bank. And as we all know, he is under fire. And as I've stated, I'm of the mind that Staley will be forced out by the end of the summer at the latest. Staley's signature achievement at JP Morgan was the 2004 majority stake the bank took in Highbridge Capital, which it now owns outright. Highbridge Capital, remember, Glenn Dubin. So you see the circle here, right? Dubin, Jess Staley, Jeffrey Epstein. Dubin, Jess Staley, Jeffrey Epstein. All of their financials are intertwined. JP Morgan bought into Highbridge Capital, and then now they own the whole entire thing, et cetera, et cetera. So all of their finances are intertwined. All of their money laundering is intertwined. So, in my opinion, it would not take very much to get a case going here and truly provide just a treasure trove of evidence when we're talking about financial transactions. And also, do you really think that if you brought all of the co-conspirators in and slapped them all with RICO charges, they wouldn't rat on these people and turn witness and testify that they were either part of the money laundering or had direct knowledge of it? Of course they would. Today, Highbridge is a $25 billion juggernaut and a pillar of the bank asset management division. Epstein, it turns out, was partially responsible for making that deal happen. In 1998, according to an individual familiar with the matter, he had introduced Staley to Dubin, the co-founder of Highbridge. And again, leveraging his relationships, leveraging information, bringing these two people together, being the linchpin in that, therefore enriching himself while also finding other means for him to launder and wash his money. It's so obvious what was going on here to me. When JP Morgan took its undisclosed stake in Highbridge, the hedge fund gave Epstein a $15 million fee for brokering the deal, though people inside Highbridge questioned what he did to earn that fee, according to a person familiar with the transaction. Highbridge declined to comment on the fees, saying that the deal's terms are private. The Wall Street Journal earlier reported the fee. Well, yeah, look, I get that. A lot of these business transactions end up staying private unless there's a source that talks about it, so I get that. But come on, $15 million for facilitating this? And then what's really galling is for J.P. Morgan, Jess Staley, and Glenn Dubin to turn around and act like their relationship with Epstein wasn't cozy, like they weren't homies, like they weren't, I mean BFFs at this point, right? All of them are intertwined in business deals. And if you don't think that they're rubbing elbows on the weekends over at old Jeff's house, you're wrong. Dubin has become close with Epstein through his wife, Eva Anderson Dubin, a former Miss Sweden and model-turned-doctor philanthropist who had been Epstein's girlfriend in the 80s. Epstein was also an investor in Highbridge until Dubin left in 2013. The Dubins apparently had a relationship with Epstein well beyond finance, even reportedly spending Thanksgiving with him after he was released from prison. Now think about that. These people, these sick bastards, the Dubins, would invite Jeffrey Epstein over to their home. They have little children, knowing that he was a sex offender, a child sex offender. These are the people who are in charge of billions of dollars and et cetera, et cetera. It's mind-numbing to think that you would allow somebody like Jeffrey Epstein into your home for Thanksgiving around your children when he was charged and convicted of what he was charged and convicted with. It is, I just don't even understand how you could possibly do that. On Friday, Dubin's name surfaced once again in the Epstein case when documents in the defamation suit by Virginia Roberts, one of Epstein's survivors, against Ghislaine Maxwell, the British co-conspirator accused of soliciting the underage girls for Epstein's sexual pleasure, were unsealed. Among the trove of documents was a 2016 deposition of Roberts. In it, she claimed that Dubin was the first person besides Epstein she was forced to have sex with in 2001. And if you want to take a look back, you can check the catalog. I did a closer look at Glenn and Eva Dubin, and we go into the situation with Virginia Roberts, and we also talk about the young 15-year-old Swedish girl that was in their kitchen and the butler was talking about, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all wrapped up in that episode. The Dubins broke off with Epstein after his recent arrest, publicly denouncing him. Glenn and Eva Dubin are outraged by the allegations against them in the unsealed court records and categorically reject them. A spokeswoman for the couple told a spokeswoman for the couple told Institutional Investor on Saturday. They've all had the same excuses, right? Oh, we're abhorred by these accusations. We reject them with all anger, and it's just such a joke to listen to them. All right? All of you, none of you knew Jeffrey Epstein. All right, we get it. None of you knew Jeffrey Epstein, even though you were all interconnected financially, even though you were all hanging out together on his island or at his house in New York, but none of you knew him. And then for J.P. Morgan, already a smarmy-ass institute, in my opinion, to have such deeper ties with Epstein than they ever reported or ever were willing to report it's just a joke. And that's why I said with Jess Staley as well, how Barclays came out and they were all, well, we got the emails from J.P. Morgan. They gave us all of the emails that had to do with Jess Staley and Jeffrey Epstein. And you believe that? You believe that a company like J.P. Morgan would air their dirty laundry like that and give you everything? Stop it. They have lawyers. They have compliance people. They have people that are going to sit down and read through all of that, and they're going to decide what they're going to disperse to you and what they're going to keep and probably burn. So when you hear these companies like J.P. Morgan act like they don't have anything to do with people like Epstein, like they weren't involved in enabling Jeffrey Epstein, they're lying. Point blank, period. They're lying. All of these financial institutions with people like Glenn Dubin at the helm and, Les Wexner, obviously, Jess Staley, all of these sort of institutions that are run by people that were very close with Epstein, they need to really evaluate the kinds of personnel that they're going to have in charge of their company. We've seen that Dubin had to go. We saw that Wexner had to go. And now Staley is under assault. If it wasn't for COVID-19, this guy will already be out. But we also have to look at Mary Erdoes as well at this point, right? Because she is also somebody who was critical in getting Jeffrey Epstein these loans. So she has to answer some questions as well. So we'll be adding her to our list, and we'll be doing a deeper dive into her involvement. Because, folks, at the end of the day, when you follow the money, you are going to find the people who are in charge of these sorts of operations. Every single time, because the money goes somewhere, and wherever that money goes, that's going to be one of the higher ups. And once you apply pressure to that person, well, we've been through it already. You know the song will be sung, and the ratting will begin, because these people were not built for this life. These people were not built for 20-year prison sentences. And the second they get those slammed down on the table in front of them, they're going to be falling over their high-priced lawyers to enter into a plea bargain. So let's make sure we keep our eyes on these financial stories as they're going forward. And definitely here on the podcast, I'm going to make sure we keep documenting this, and we're going to keep following the money. And we're going to go wherever that money leads. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, everybody, we'll be back tomorrow, and we'll do it all over again.